Nerds, and welcome to the 501st Com Chatter. I am Chloe, and
I'm Will, and as you can see, we have a very special guest with us today. We have Cavan Scott. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's absolute pleasure having you on here with us today. We can't wait to sort of pick your brain a bit with
Okay.
High Republican, some writing questions,
Right.
so this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
So why don't you start by introducing yourself to our listeners who might not know who you are?
So, my name's Cavan Scott. I'm one of the story architects of the High Republic, which has been an initiative that's been running since 2000. Well, we've been working on it since 2018, and we launched it in 2021. And it's set 200 years before the prequel trilogy, and it tells a story of many Jedi in the trials they go through in that period of time. I'm a Bristolian, which it's good to find a podcast here in Bristol. And yeah, I've written for Star Wars for a good many years now, as well as lots of other things I write for Marvel, DC, and some of my own material too.
Cool. Yeah, again, thanks for joining us. You got some interesting writing questions.
Once again, thanks for coming on.
No worries.
So I'm going to start with, for people that don't really know you very well, how many books have you written?
I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I've been doing this since 1999 now, and I've written across a load of not just Star Wars, Doctor Who, Pacific Rim, Assassin's Creed, loads of, even Angry Birds. I rewrote Treasure Island in the form of Angry Birds. I mean, that was defacing a great work of art, but also the Bristol connection, so that's good. So yeah, I literally don't know. I mean, it's hundreds across everything. And then I write audio dramas as well, and TV and comics. So I've never actually counted. I think I started off counting, and then it just became the job, and so I don't really.
Just lost count.
I've lost count. It's awful, isn't it? But I just don't. It's not something I think about. They're all behind me in my studio, and that's a good visual reminder when I'm feeling a bit lost for a day. I turn around and realise, oh no, I know what I'm doing. Which happens. I learned that from Paul McCartney. Apparently, does the same every now and then. He goes, "I'm a rubbish musician," and then he turns around and looks at his records and goes, "Oh no, I did some things." So I thought if Paul McCartney can feel like that, it's all right that I do every now and then. So yeah, I honestly don't know the and that's not me showing off. I just don't know.
Well, I mean, that is it's a big compliment for yourself. That you've been able to come up with these many.
It's my job. So I'm very pleased it's my job. I'm very lucky it's my job. And I've been doing it, as I say, 2 decades or more now. So yeah, it's an absolute joy. My to-do list is the same as when I was 10, and I want to keep that way for a long time. So yeah.
Nice.
I also wanted to ask, did you always want to become a writer?
I originally wanted to be a Blue Peter presenter, and then I wanted to be a Swap Shop presenter. Swap Shop was a Saturday morning TV show way back when for kids. I'm rubbish on camera, so I soon abandoned all of those ideas. But I always wanted to be in media in some way, I think. I started off writing for Doctor Who fanzines back in the day when fanzines were put together in people's bedrooms, and I used to send off what we now call fan fiction. Awful fan fiction. I really hope no one's ever found it. That's a challenge. Dreadful things like Batman teaming up with the Seventh Doctor. Oh no, it's awful. And so I used to, and that's what gave me the bug really. So I used to send these things off and see my name, see the stories and the articles appear. And so that was sort of set me on the road. So there was always, I knew I wanted to do something, I just didn't know what it was when I was really young.
Just something fun. What is your writing process like? Like, do you sort of have a notebook and jot down ideas, or?
I have many notebooks scattered everywhere across the house and in bags and in the car, and I'm forever jotting down ideas and then going, which notebook's that in? So yeah, I mean, a lot of people who write will tell you don't stop. It is a lifelong thing, a 24-hour thing, except when you're asleep, and then sometimes it even invades your dreams. So, but yeah, it's very hard to switch off when I'm thinking about stories, because there's always something ticking away in the back of my mind. So yeah, I do write down ideas. I'm trying to combine them into one notebook or online. So because I do have that notebook. I had it recently. I was on a Star Wars convention in France, which George Mann, another one of the High Republic authors, and a friend of mine. And I came up with an idea while we were sitting there, signing autographs, wrote the idea down in a notebook, came back here, went, oh, that's a good idea. And then I had no idea what notebook it was in. So I was going through all these pages. So yeah, I'm trying to be a bit more organised. But also I like notebooks. So I collect notebooks, and then I feel I should misuse them. And so there's lots of notebooks just full of things. But when I'm working on a project, there is a dedicated notebook for that project that everything gets written down.
What is your favourite part about being a writer?
I think, it gives me a lifestyle that I love. You know, I get to do this for a job, and I am always grateful for that. And I realise what a privilege that is. And I get to work at home, and I get to see my kids every day, because largely every day, because I'm at home. Granted, I'm quite often shut away in front of a screen, but I'm there, and they're there as well. So I think that's the freedom of that job, and the fact I can do it anywhere is part of it. But then for the actual process, I don't think there's anything better than whatever you've been working on going out into the world, because by then you've gone through. I don't want to say it's like giving birth, because I don't want to say anything is painful. So my wife might listen to this, and she will then show me how painful things could be. But when something's released and it's out there in the world, you forget everything that went into it. And you know, some projects can be tougher than other projects, like any part of any given job. But as soon as it's out there, it's people are picking up, they're enjoying it, they're discussing it, hopefully. And even if they're not enjoying it and discussing it, they're still discussing it, which is a good thing. But yeah, it does put everything in perspective, and there's just something about that first day that's exciting, knowing that, you know, at that point it's a liminal state. It's like it's just about to be discovered by people, and that's an amazing feeling. Scary feeling, but it's a good scary feeling. It's anticipation.
So do you take people's criticisms quite well, or do you, if someone was to come up to you and say, I really like this book, but I didn't like this particular part of it, how do you normally take that?
Well, I think it depends how you are on the day, like with anything. I mean, to do my job, you have to take criticism well, because you get a lot of criticism even before it gets out there, because there's notes from everyone, and you have to work out which battles you're gonna, which hills you're gonna die on, which battles you're gonna say, okay, that's not worth the fight. By the time it's out, there's nothing you can do. And yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that not everyone can like everything. Not everyone should like everything. We should definitely not be a monoculture. We shouldn't like the same things all the time. It's better when we don't. So there's parts of the great Star Wars tapestry that I'm not too keen on, but that's life. There's parts I love and other people don't. That's life. And yeah, you put something out there, and I think that's the point. It becomes a conversation, and it's. I don't think you should get upset or hurt about it. It depends how it's said, like all things. I mean, criticism is criticism. It can be constructive. It can also be incredibly personal. But most of the time, if it's personal, you just have to go, nothing I can do about that. You've got no control over it. Mm-hmm. So you have to learn defense mechanisms, I suppose. So yeah, it does depend who it is, when it is, and how you're feeling on that day. But the majority of the time, I think by now I've got quite a healthy attitude towards it. But ask me again tomorrow if I'm having a bad day, and that'll be completely different. It'll be nuclear.
How did it feel to have the title New York Times bestselling author?
Bonkers, because I was born, a few miles away from here in South Green Hospital. I'm a Bristol lad, born and bred, who grew up loving these characters, loving comics, loving books, and the title New York Times bestseller just seems so exotic and seems the kind of thing that we, a local lad like me doesn't do. And I am also, again, very aware it's because of Star Wars. It's because I was part of this big machine and this big phenomenon. And so I always bear that in mind. But yeah, it was humbling, it was exciting, it was slightly surreal. I think I had a biscuit to celebrate, literally. A cup of tea and a biscuit, most British way of celebrating in total. But yeah, it is a weird thing, and it's always there now. That's the weird thing. It's always there. It's it's always just part of my title, which is crazy. But yeah, it was a surreal thing, absolutely surreal.
Because when you hear for me, I know nothing about writing. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I tried writing a book ages ago. I don't know how that went. Some people said it was not too bad. I don't know why. But someone who's not really got into that much, even hearing someone as a New York bestseller, immediately I think straight away, wow, what an award, no matter where they're from,
Yeah.
And then when you actually read a piece of material that is classed in this New York bestseller, you do realise, it is really good. So it's something that I think you definitely should be very proud of.
Well, no, I am proud of it. I mean, I'm a Brit, so we don't do pride very well. And part of working in the States and working on these kind of projects and being a working writer in this world is that you have to be a bit more American, And I remember when I first started out, and I started being very self-deprecating when releases came out and taking the mickey out of what I was doing. And my employers at the time were very simple, saying, stop that, don't be brutish about it, because you need to sell this. And again, as I've worked with people who work on things like Star Wars, you realise what a different culture it is. And it is all about success and achievement. And so you have to come to terms with that. And as a Brit, that can be really hard. But no, I am definitely proud of it. I'm proud of the entire initiative and what it's done and how it, where it came from and what we've achieved. And now, how many books, talk about how many books I've written, how many books are now part of the High Republic, the fact we have a children's cartoon, animated series, the fact we have the Acolytes, we have games, we have toys. This morning, a lightsaber turned up on my doorstep from Hasbro, which is Acolyte High Republic lightsaber. And that's bonkers. And so, yeah, there is a pride there. But it's that weird thing of also it's what you've been doing for so long. So it's an odd thing.
Just briefly mentioning there, you mentioned about how many books and novels and media there is now for the High Republic. I will admit I have a reading list, and I am slowly getting through it in order. And I've been going through this now for a couple of months, and I'm still nowhere near completing phase 1.
Yeah.
So I know how much.
But the thing is, I always say to people, because some people get quite upset about it, that they can't keep up, and and I am absolutely aware there's a lot. There's a lot for us to read and keep up with and work out what's going on and everything. So goodness of people out lives out there, who have to try and keep up with it as well. But that's what I say, it's not going anywhere. Those books are going to be there now. That's the great thing about Star Wars literature. It's all out there. We're now seeing the reissuing of the Legends books as part of the collection and the EU books. But again, they were always in print. So these things. That's what I love about Star Wars literature is the fact you can go back and read things that came out in the early 90s for the first time and it's new to you. And that's the exciting part of fandom, that there is always someone discovering it for the first time. There will be people picking up the original Thrawn trilogy for the first time and reading it or listening to it for the first time, and I love that. I love the fact there is always these entry points that people can get into.
And like you mentioned just then, the original Thrawn trilogy, what we're seeing with recent Star Wars media, like the new Ahsoka show, we're seeing these literature stories like the original Thrawn series be brought into live action. So for people who didn't have a chance to read the original novels, they're watching the show, and then all of a sudden they're going, actually a minute, I might go back and actually read the Heir to the Empire novels.
Exactly. So, it's literally the first step into a larger world. That's what all of these franchises, but Star Wars especially has, and I think it's the same for Doctor Who as well. You start watching it, I started with Star Wars with the comics before the films, and whatever your entry point, it's exciting that you've got so much to experience. But I realise it can be daunting as well. But like all these things, if you're a history nut, you've got all those things to read, all those things to experience. And let's face it, Star Wars is a bit like reading history, historical fiction. There's a lot of it. It's an entire world out there to explore. And that's the bit I find so exciting. And I get so excited when I meet new fans who have come in because they've watched, they watched the sequel trilogy, or they watched, I mean, now we're going to have a new series of fans who come in from Young Jedi Adventures and will eventually start reading the other material as well. That's amazing. And that's how this franchise has continued for so long, and how it has survived, and how it wasn't just 3 movies and then went away. It is a huge world, but it's one that we can explore at our own rate. And you know that there's loads of other people who are exploring it at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's part of the beauty of Star Wars as well. Like, obviously, we sort of grew up with the prequel trilogy, but then, like, our parents grew up with the originals, and now there's people that will be young and grow up with, like, Young Jedi Adventures. And
For my daughters, they were just the right age for Rey. So for them, Rey is what Anakin is to the prequel trilogy, and what Luke and Han was for me. So again, it's that thing of seeing every generation do it. Every generation finding something in it. And my kids found it on their own. I tried for years to get them into it, and they saw Rebels, and Rebels blew their mind. And then Force Awakens came on, as I say, just the right time, and that was it. They were done. And it was at the time I was sort of starting to get into writing Star Wars, so it was a lucky coincidence in a way. But yeah, seeing it through their eyes now and seeing the excitement. Again, I was an OT fan who had a complicated relationship with the prequels when they first came out, and have grown to love them over time, mainly because of the comics and the Clone Wars, and and that wider era being expanded upon. And I'm seeing exactly the same thing happen with my daughters now. They will not hear a word said against the sequel trilogy. There are parts of the sequel trilogy that they go, I'm not sure about that, but they love it with a passion, and those characters are their Star Wars, and will always be their Star Wars. And I can see, 20 years' time, when we have a Star Wars celebration and the sequel cards come on like Hayden did a couple of years ago, and the room goes mad. That's how Star Wars evolves and keeps growing. That's how this entire thing works.
Yeah, and I don't think it's ended any time.
No.
Anytime soon.
No.
Just going a bit back to your books that you've written, is there a particular novel of yours that you are most proud of?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think in the High Republic, The Rising Storm, which is very nicely put there, was such a big moment for me as a Star Wars fan to write a Del Rey novel. So I've written Star Wars before for Disney, for younger readers, but to write, I think it was the 30th anniversary of Heir to the Empire as well, and it was like, so there were celebrations going on at the time it was published. So again, it felt like I was standing on the shoulder of giants, and giants that I read, and the first time I met Tim Zorn, I was properly trying not to fanboy, because that entire Thrawn trilogy, Dark Empire from Dark Horse, that was sort of like a re-energizing for me at the time of my fandom. And so, I think Rising Storm is probably still the one that I'm most proud of, because it was at a time as well when we were starting out on this journey and we were pushing everything together and we didn't really know how it was working. So definitely I think Rising Storm out of everything so far.
I mean, personally, Rising Storm, I would say, is like my favourite, what I've read in the High Republic so far. I look forward to talking to you about some of the specific characters in that in it. But I just think, the whole story as itself is, a really nice little concept. And it's definitely increased my love for the High Republic more.
Thank you.
So I'm very honoured that I'm having this chat with you.
I know, I really appreciate that. And at the time when I was writing it, there was also part of my mind. I mean, I had an inkling there were more novels coming in the High Republic, but I thought this could be the only time I write one of these. So I just want to enjoy it, and I want to put everything into it, and probably put everything into it. I'll show all these characters in and all these ideas that I've been playing around with in my head. But I think I will always look back at that and be the one that I think. Outside of that, I did some young, some middle grade novels, right back at the beginning, Adventures in Wild Space, which again was around the time of The Force Awakens and Rebels, and so I spent a lot of time going in schools with that, and again I was seeing kids getting excited about Star Wars again. So again, it's not just the novel, it's everything around it at the time and what it reminds you. Rising Storm reminds me of the launch of the High Republic. Those novels remind me of going and seeing those kids and seeing Star Wars come back in the eyes of really young kids. So that's always got a bearing on when you look back at the books you've done.
What was it like getting the call to say you'd be writing novels and graphic novels from the High Republic era?
But when we first were called up to do this, I didn't know what I'd be writing. So, we had the call, the five of us, we didn't even know who the other four were. They asked us to come together and come up with this thing which became, over time, the High Republic. Again, it was a sort of pinch me moment. It was in San Diego, which in itself sounds very exotic when you're sitting in Bristol. As part of San Diego Comic Con, which I go to every year. And I'd been doing a bit of Star Wars, and I was invited out for a meeting, and was asked if I would like to take part in this thing. It was called the All Stars Initiative at that point. I knew nothing about it, but I knew it would take the next 5 years of my life if I said yes. So without really knowing what it was, I said yes. That was, again, it was exciting knowing it wouldn't be linked into any films or TV. It wasn't there anyway, It would be hopefully trying to recapture some of the feeling of the old EU, which was so important to me, and those interconnected books like Young Jedi Order and things like that. There was an excitement and also a little bit of apprehension. I didn't really know where it was going to go. I literally didn't know who else was going to be working on it, which now looking back is bananas to me. But and those people have become a huge part of my life. But back then I was basically given this chance, and I didn't know anything about what that would involve. I knew they sort of got me when they said, "We'll take you out to Skywalker Ranch." I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that."
Very jealous right now.
And again, it was that thing of like seizing the opportunity, because it's something I never thought. I read about Skywalker Ranch, obviously in making of books and in Star Log magazine and all these things. The thought of actually going to it, even if nothing ever else happened, that was the exciting point with doing that first part of the journey.
Exciting.
Going to Skywalker Ranch is a dream of any Star Wars fan.
It's the promised land. It's hard to explain that place. You can just feel it's built for creativity. Those buildings and everything, the way it's been designed, it's built in a lot of ways like a film set. Everything that George put into building a world, he put into building the world of Skywalker Ranch, and there's just something in the air there. And when what went on before there, when you went on, everything that's happened there, you'll literally feel like you're walking on holy ground from a creative point of view. It's stunning place.
Do you have any advice for people who aspire to become writers?
Right, it's a cliche, but I think you stop being an aspiring writer when you start writing. The moment you start doing that. Get started, don't wait for permission. Obviously, if you want to write something in Star Wars, you have to have permission, because it's not something you can just do. You have to be asked to do it. So that's why the lesson is always just start writing, start building your own thing, start building your own career. And linked to that, starting is great, starting is really important, finishing is the next most important thing. Because it's very easy to start things and seeing it through to the end and finishing a project. That's what people are looking for. Because literally, you need a finished project for anyone else to experience it. So my 2 bits of advice are always start, give it your all, have fun, and then try and get to the finish so you can see what that entire process is like.
So we've only got a few more left.
Okay.
What is something you like to do in your spare time when you're not writing?
Watching Star. No, I do watch. See, there are moments when the last thing I want to do in the evening is watch the Star Wars. Not because I don't like it anymore, but just because it just makes me think of work, and I keep going. the cogs start going. I watch. I for my sins go and watch Bristol City play allegedly football. Again, football's actually a big thing for me because I can switch off. A lot of what I do, because I'm very lucky, and as I joked about earlier on, my to-do list hasn't changed since I was 10. a lot of what I do is what I love. So it's very hard to separate it. So that's when something like football, I am atrocious at football. Anyone who went to Phil and High down the road and played football with me knows I was really bad and haven't played since for good reason. But I can watch it and give opinions on anything I see on the pitch, and it has no bearing on my life, on my professional life, other than when I'm there. So yeah, football is a moment where I can just switch off and just go for 90 minutes or whatever, and the old thing about going down to the ground on the day and all that kind of thing. It is a moment where my job goes away and evaporates. There are other things, making Legos another one, although I do make a lot of Star Wars Legos, so that doesn't help. But yeah, football's probably the thing that helps me switch off the most.
Yeah, I'd say football for me as well, but also Lego. We're very guilty of that ourselves, building Lego, can't help it.
It's too fun. What is your favourite Star Wars film?
Return of the Jedi. For years I used to say Empire Strikes Back because obviously it is probably the best film. But then I was thinking that's a really easy answer, and actually the film that gives me most joy is Return of the Jedi, because I remember being, the age I was when I first saw it. I remember seeing the Ewoks for the first time. I remember seeing Jabba's Palace for the first time. Everything about that film blew my mind. And it's the one I reach for most when I just want to feel good about Star Wars, about watching films. It's one of my comfort films. So for just pure nostalgia and fun, it's always Return of the Jedi.
I totally understand what for me, it's about memories for me. And for me, a memory that I will never forget is when I think I was 9 at the time, and Revenge of the Sith came out at cinema. I went and saw it, and I was in queues. There was people in costumes. There was Darth Vaders. There was people with lightsabers.
Yeah.
And for me, I remember that was the first time that I went to the cinema to be in wow, this is incredible. And for me, that's why Revenge of the Sith is my favourite, because it's just the memory of that time of being there in that queue, and at the time still being what is going on here? And
nostalgia is there was a point in history when they actually thought it was a disease, but nostalgia is it's such a comfort so many times, and so much of what we it's a conversation we have at home all the time. Why do we love this? What is it about Star Wars or Doctor Who or James Bond that makes me so happy? And a lot of it is wrapped up again, as I said, in the times and the memories, in the experiences. Outside of Star Wars, one of my favourite films, again from the early 80s, was when I was starting to experience cinema for the first time. The Wrath of Khan for Star Trek, that just, still my Star Trek is that crew at that point in their life. I was a young kid who was very, very invested in a bunch of old men and women running around the galaxy in a spaceship. Ghostbusters. I can still so vividly remember seeing Ghostbusters for the first time. And again, it's one of those movies that I will constantly reach for. If I see it, I watch it. If it's on the plane, I watch it. And I'm back to being 10. I'm back to coming out of that cinema and racing down the motorway and going home from the cinema, and imagining Ecto 1 screaming by. And always the point I can believe I heard it, and it's those moments that make you a fan. It's those moments, I think, when you're an older fan, you remember what it's like to be a fan because you remember what those moments were like, even if it's something you come to much later in life. So I think that's why they're so important. And they do make you the people you are.
Yeah.
Mine is the same. So Revenge of the Sith. When I was little, I remember going to see it at the cinema, and all the little toys, the little lightsabers that would flick out. I used to walk around dressed as Darth Vader. I used to love it.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me it's prequels as well, just because I grew up with them.
Yeah.
Who is your favourite High Republic character?
Oh, that's a tough one. If it's my character, it's like my babies. I'm very fond of Skier. A lot of times Skier was not what I expected when I started to write him to be in such a big part of the team now. I think Elzo Man is one of the most complicated characters, and I love him for being a bit of a mess, and I love him for trying his best. he's probably one of the most human Jedi we've ever seen. And so for that reason, I think Eldar probably pips the post, but don't tell Lorna. She won't like it.
Yes, definitely don't want to tell me to do that. Speaking of, like characters from the High Republic, I want to ask about one of your characters.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was the inspiration for Ty Yorick?
We just wanted, I wanted a Jedi who hunted monsters. So that was, it's as basic as that. So Mike Spillane, director and creative director at Disney, at Lucasfilm Publishing, and me, we're massive Hammer horror fans, Universal fans, monster movie fans, horror fans. Most of our conversations when we're not talking about Star Wars are talking about those kind of movies. And so, we talked about this idea of someone, an adventurer who would go out there and fight big monsters. And it sounds really basic when you say it like that, but that was her origins. And then I saw Phil Noto did an amazing bit of concept art. It was actually for Charles's pitch for what would become the High Republic. Because we had 5 bits of art, we had 5 pictures, which would, for whatever this was going to be. And Charles's one had this amazing bit of concept art done by Phil of all these characters lined up. And I made it my mission to try and write the majority of those into the stories, because there was just Phil creating. It was just Phil, as a true concept art. So, and when I saw the figure which I adopted as Ty, it all became clear. Because when I was first thinking about Ty, I didn't know if she was female, male. I didn't know, I knew she was a Jedi, but I didn't think she could probably be a proper Jedi, because they wouldn't go and do this. So that's when the idea of a former Padawan came along. So it was a combination. When I saw Phil's artwork, that's when she coalesced into who she is. And she's been a joy to write. And I was writing it today. And she's always fun, because I've got this habit now with the High Republic. I write most of all Keith Trennis, Lorna D, and Ty Yorick, and none of them are what you could call, your traditional heroes. Keith's probably the nearest, and she has her moments, and she questions everything. And so I do love writing those 3. But Ty is always fun, because she really doesn't like anything except for just going after monsters. And if anything else gets in the way of that, she's quite grumpy about it until someone reminds her of why she does it.
Yeah, I think Ty is a brilliant character, and obviously, I think again, the Rising Storm, I think, was a brilliant introduction to this character, which then has gone on.
Yeah, and I didn't know when we introduced her how she was going to continue either. We didn't know at that point there were going to be comics with her. That came in after. Basically, as it started to grow and snowball, different parts of Disney wanted different stories they could tell. And Ty came about because Disney in Italy, who produced comics, wanted to produce some comic series which then could be printed around the world. And so we knew Ty was in the Rising Storm, and we realised, well, that could be a way to tell her origin story. And again, it's been a joy, people are really latching onto her, and being able to spend more time with her, and now Drew and her squire, she likes to call him, not Padawan. Again, like Lorna, she's developed in ways I didn't think she would, because I didn't think she would have so much space to develop.
Yeah.
It's I always wonder what would happen if they met.
I can imagine that'd be a very interesting story.
Yeah.
So, for example, like the Rising Storm that we just mentioned, how long does it take you to come up with the idea for a story and then to write the story? So we'll use Rising Storm as an example. So how long, did you get the idea for it before, and then how long did you take to actually write it and be like, do you know what, I'm really happy with this outcome?
I think Rising Storm was about a year from beginning to end, until the final file went off to be printed. It was, slightly different because we were creating the story of the Rising Storm when we were creating the story of the High Republic as a whole. So we we knew the Republic Fair would be happening. We knew the things that would be happening around that. I think I was writing it at the same time that Charles was writing Out of the Jedi, so I was reacting to what he was writing and incorporating that in. So it was a bit of a weird setup, but yeah, I think that was a year all in all. It's not always like that. You know, sometimes it's only much shorter. I've written, not Star Wars, but I've written other books in a month because you have to. You know, and I never like doing it, but you know, that's sometimes what you have to do. And usually they're hopefully shorter. But yeah, that was about a year. I mean, that's still quite a quick turnaround for a novel. But I was almost, you had the propulsion of everything else happening at the same time. And also, I knew we had to keep it moving because Claudia then was starting to work on Fallen Star, you know, and she was linking into it. So once that train was moving, there was no stopping it.
You just had to keep powering.
Yeah. And at the same time, I was writing the comic, and I think I was starting the Ty Yorick series by the time I was finishing that. And then I was thinking about Tempest Runner, and so it was a period of time which was actually wonderful because it was the pandemic, so it gave me a reason to exist every day. You know, it was like something to do. We were very fortunate that this project continued throughout as we delayed the launch, and so it meant we had a little bit more time and we could focus on it. So yeah, it was probably a year while also doing other things as well.
Yeah.
Lots of projects at the same time.
They're all connected. I mean, that's how it really was pretty much. I was writing one Craytron comic called Shadow Service at the same time, but that was almost like my palate cleanser. You know, when I was doing so much Star Wars, and it gave me a chance to go and do something else, and then go, oh, right, I'm ready to go back and do Star Wars now. You know, and keep that excitement going.
So like you mentioned about the Tempest Runner.
Mm-hmm.
So next year we know that your second audio drama.
This year.
So Tempest Break comes out this year.
Yeah.
So without any spoilers, we don't want any spoilers.
No, I can't give you any.
We don't want that. We don't want to upset the fans or the people in charge. But what can we sort of expect to hear?
A lot more Lorna. So if you've been reading the Marvel comic, it continues. I think the last issue of the current run comes out this month, and then Tempest Breaker literally takes up the story minutes after that comic finishes.
Okay.
So that gives you an idea of who's in it. It is Lorna and Keeve, and we've added into the mix of that Ava coming back into that group. Now Lorna and Ava and Keeve have a history together, so it gives us a chance to explore that. So there's definitely more Lorna. There's voices you will recognise from the first audio if you've listened, and it may have a chance for Lorna to come up against Marky Unroe in some way again, which is going to be interesting seeing where she is now at this point in her life.
Okay, well, I'm very excited to get into that part at some point. So obviously, you know, in latest Star Wars, you know, media in terms of like TV shows and that, we've had the release of The Acolyte, which personally I'm a fan of. I quite enjoy it. Obviously, they've introduced the character of Vanestra Rowe, who we have seen appear in your books and others and novels. And who would you like to see be brought into like shows like The Acolyte?
Of the stuff that I've done.
Yeah, so not just like The Acolyte, but characters that from the High Republic that you sort of worked on, you would like to see be brought into, shall we say, live action TV or film.
I've got to be really careful now because I can't. Not that anything's happening, but just more that I know where all of these characters, how their story ends, and so you know, and that end is for me in the very near future. You know, I am now in the last run of things, and I know those times are coming. I'd like to see the more scoundrel-esque part of the High Republic and the kind of stuff Daniel's been doing. I'd like to see that explored. I'd love to go back to Jeddah. A show about Jeddah, which obviously I was involved in quite a lot in Phase 2. That melting pot of a city with all these different Force religions, which again we've seen in The Acolyte, we've seen, you know, the witches, we've seen how different people view the Force. I'd love love to see some of those characters and situations that we had going on Jeddah. I think there's so many opportunities for stories there for those people who live in that place where loads of different religions, cultures all meet, all wanting the same thing. So yeah, I'd love to visit Jeddah again on screen.
So yeah, that's what leads into my next thing. What piece of work that you've worked on would you like to see brought to live action? Again, could be a graphic novel, it could be a novel itself. But what story would you like to see incorporated?
I think of all the stuff I've done, the most standalone within the High Republic is Ty, and I think she would make a very good transfer into live action. You could see a story. There is loads of Ty story we haven't touched upon. We know when she left the Order. Yeah. We know when we meet her again when she's a monster hunter. We've hinted at this time when she was a mercenary. We've hinted at all these people she met. There is so much there about how this young Padawan goes on to make the choice to become a saber for hire. I suppose it would be Star Wars equivalent of The Witcher in a lot of ways, but just to follow that story through, and have a character that you could grow up with, so a teenage girl who would go on to become this incredible young woman, and this complicated young woman. I think I'd like to see Ty realised in that way.
Cool. What has been your favourite High Republic story that you've worked on?
I've worked on, I suppose it's the comic, has to be, because it's been the most consistent throughout. And it incorporates so many of the other things I've done. So now I think I can firmly say that Tempest Breaker is within that story, because it's very much part of that corner of the High Republic. So I think it's the story of the Starlight Jedi, specifically Cavan and Skir, and the relationships with Ava and everyone else who goes with. I think it has to be their story, the one I enjoyed the most.
So then, outside of your work, what has been your favourite?
I love Temptation of the Force so much. I lavish praise on Tess, which is very embarrassed by it. But I thought Temptation of the Force was incredible, and then preceding that with I as well, George wrote. I've loved seeing the beginning of Phase 3 and seeing those characters all coming back a little bit blooded, and a little bit tested through the metal of what they've had to do. But yeah, that first wave of Phase 3, I really enjoyed the storytelling. But yeah, I thought Tessa's book was incredible.
Nice. So just quickly going away from the High Republic, is there any character from another era of Star Wars that you would love to create Star Wars with? So, we're talking, this could be like Revan from the Old Republic, or we could even be talking about Kylo from the sequels. Is there a character or characters that really stand out that you like, I would really like to write a story for?
I mean, I'd love to write Darth Bane. I'd be absolutely intimidated because the Darth Bane trilogy is my favourite Star Wars novels. And I think Drew did such amazing work. I'd like to see those books adapted. I think the Darth Bane trilogy would make an incredible animated film series, like in the same way that DC does, the animated universe. So yeah, definitely something that I'd love to write something in the old Sith Empire. That would be incredible. But yeah, the sequels actually, because of my daughter's love of them, and I share, again, it's that thing of like, my experience of the sequels is being in cinemas with them, and so I'd love to explore those characters more. I'd love to explore Finn more, and yeah, I mean, Kylo Ren would be fun, but I think I'd like to get more in. If I had a choice, get into more of the head of the Resistance and what it means, and what it meant to face the. We live in a world where things go through cycles, and their experience in that as well. They thought the future was bright, and then it's not so bright suddenly. So yeah, I think I'd love to see like a Clone Wars-esque cartoon animated series set in the sequel era, because I think it would do for a lot of fans what Clone Wars did for me in the prequels. It would give you space to breathe and to experience and fall in love with those characters all over again. So I would love to be a part of that and to explore that. And also because at the end of the day, that's the furthest point we are. You know, it's great to go back and do stuff in the past, but I'd love to start things to push forward.
Yeah, push. You know, because like you said, the Clone Wars for me was I love the Clone Wars again. That helped build my love for the prequels, and that helped me connect more with characters in the films and the shows. And you know, you then suddenly feel a little bit more sorry when Order 66 happens, and you know, some certain Jedi don't make it. So yeah, seeing something like that in the sequel era, I think would be really good to see, because it's just something we don't have. You know, the sequel era gets a little bit of a, you say, not the kindest of loving from the fans, which I understand. It's, to a lot of people, it's not the best, but I do understand that a lot of people also love it. So I would like to see more media in that era.
I think these things all come around. Again, that was a few years ago. You couldn't find anything prequel trilogy if you wanted to, and now we're going through so much again of prequel material. So I think I honestly believe the sequels era will come again, and they'll come around. And just as we're revisiting now, we seem to be revisiting around the Return of the Jedi era again. It's because the people worked on that era. You know, it's the people who love the prequels are now making prequel material. People who love the Return of the Jedi era are now making Return of the Jedi era. There's a generation of filmmakers and creators coming who grew up on BB-8 and Rey and Finn and Poe, and so will want to write about that. And I think that's when it will come. Difficulty more with the sequel trilogy is obviously it's tighter. There's not a lot of time as you have the prequel trilogy. There is great spaces of time. But again, it's a big galaxy. It hasn't necessarily always got to be about those core of people. There are so many other people in the Resistance. You know, there are stories to be told there. I think that'd be really interesting.
Again, like you mentioned about the vast majority of characters, you know, this galaxy and history there's so many people, you know, and I think that is a reason as well why, again, I'm so fond of the High Republic, because it's an era where we basically have no idea what happened before the prequels until this era came along, you know, and we get an introduction to characters that have become favourites, you know, and again, it's all because of an era that, you know, you yourself was part of creating, and you know, I definitely feel like there's so much more stories out there to be told.
Yeah, and it breeds. I mean, we've seen it in Ahsoka. You know, again, it's now hard to think of the prequel era without Ahsoka being part of it. But of course, there was a huge point in time we didn't know she existed, and now she seems so involved and so much part of the story. And again, I think that is what will happen with the sequel trilogy. Other characters will be written into the story that open the story up. I firmly believe that. It's something we've seen. We're talking about the High Republic again. There are so many new characters here that people are identifying with, you know, and it shows how quickly people do latch onto these characters. We saw it with Ahsoka, we saw it with the, you know, what went on from the Clone Wars into Rebels. You know, we've seen that, everything that Dave Filoni's doing in, you know, his Corner of the Galaxy at the minute. You see that being expanded upon, growing, buttressing everything else as well, you know, giving you new experiences, new understanding of what was going on at the time. And yeah, I firmly believe that's where we're heading with the sequel trilogy as well. We will see those moments, we will see them grow, we will see that era get bigger and bigger and bigger, because that's what has always happened in Star Wars. Whether it's from the original trilogy to the prequels to now, it doesn't stand still, and it doesn't get, you know, frozen in carbonite. It's a growing organic story that is constantly changing, and canon is constantly being rewritten, and it's just part of life. Because you know what? In real life, canon is always rewritten, and that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. And also where, like, the sequel trilogy was so different to what previously was, like the original trilogy, I feel like there is going to be a point where, you know, the Mandalorian, Ahsoka, or possibly like a Tales of the Jedi series sort of bridges that gap, and then we'll find out more about those characters, about like what happened before, and there's only like more stories to tell.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, with my fan hat on, and this is not with any kind of Lucasfilm official guidance or whatever. Surely there's a Tales of the Jedi series, and we find out about Luke training Leia. You know, what? That can't just be a couple of shots in one film. You know,
true. That's quite a big moment.
It's a huge moment, especially for an EU fan. You know, to see Leia with a lightsaber in her hand. It was, you know, I want to see more of that. And likewise, you know, all of those different Captain Phasma, Delilah proved that there is a life to Captain Phasma outside that film. Imagine a Captain Phasma. Imagine, you know, Captain Phasma didn't. People have a habit of falling in things in Star Wars and living. You know, it seems to be what happens. Yeah. Somehow they always return. Somehow Phasma could return and have, you know, become the Boba Fett of that series. In the same way that, you know, Boba Fett vanished away and then had lots of adventures after he died. And, you know, and Sith can come back from falling down big shafts in various pieces. Yeah. Again, just because those stories are tight at the minute, it doesn't mean they can't be opened up, because we've seen it happen all the way through Star Wars, and I'm ready for it. Absolutely ready for it.
Definitely. And just quickly, like the point that you mentioned about canon is constantly rewritten, that is a sentiment that I would reiterate to a lot of Star Wars fans, especially at the minute with the Acolyte. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but from things that I've seen by certain fans, you know, I think they need to calm down a little bit.
I don't understand it, because that's what I find fun, is when canon changes and you have to try and make it work. I think it also comes with being a Star Wars fan and being a Doctor Who fan, because Doctor Who has no idea what canon is, and never has. And, you know, I'm speaking to someone who had to co-write the definitive history of the Daleks when they have 3 origins and make them all fit. You know, and so you have that series over there, which revels in the fact it can rewrite itself because it's time travel and all that business, but doesn't let continuity get in the way of a good story. And then you have Star Wars, which again, in its original form, didn't let canon and lore get in the way of a good story.
Yeah.
You know, originally when you look back at the making of and you read the thing, Yoda wasn't a Jedi. You know, there's that great moment in the making of Return of the Jedi film, to a book, where Lucas says, "Oh yeah, no, he's not a Jedi. He just trained them." A few years later, you know, he's a Jedi, and everything. And again, that's the fun bit, and it's why I do what I do. I love taking those points and going, "Oh, okay, so how does that work?" And I mean, I spend most of my time trying to weave EU stuff back into canon and making it fit. I mean, other than the High Republic, the one thing I probably know most of all is bringing back a big green rabbit from the EU and trying to weave him into the story again. And that's for me is the fun bit. And I don't get why it causes I get caring. I get being annoyed. But then my brain goes, okay, how do we make it work?
Yeah. What's
the stories we can tell? How do I become more like George Lucas? Because that's what George Lucas does.
Yeah.
And he cherry picks the things he likes. Oh, of Coruscant, yeah, I like that. I might have put that over. You know, again, I grew up reading the Dark Horse version of the Clone Wars. So it was a real surprise when I saw the Clone Wars version of the Clone Wars, because they don't necessarily mix.
No.
And I didn't get that across at the time, because I was like, it's an interpretation. And then in my head, those 2 versions of the Clone Wars sort of work together, which is when the joy I had when I was working on something like Dooku Jedi Lost, where I could take that part of Venture's backstory and that part of Venture's backstory and that part of Venture's backstory and make it one whole.
Yeah.
You know, which again, the 3 versions of Ventress don't necessarily match if you look at them as a pure lore thing. The fun thing is making them match and being creative, because these are stories, and stories are meant to be built upon and to change and to be reinterpreted. And for me, honestly, that's the fun bit. I like being surprised. I, like any fan, have a moment of shaking my fist at the clouds and going, "Oh, how dare you!" But then you just get on with it, and you see, like any part of fandom, when you have new fans come in at a time, it changes it, and I think you need to embrace that change. It doesn't mean you can't not like old things, but life doesn't just stop. Life carries on, and you can be guaranteed that if the EU was still the canon, it would be constantly be rewritten.
Yeah.
You know, a TV show would come out and contradict a book from 1999. Of course it would.
Yeah.
Because that's how these things work.
So just going back to the High Republic, what would you consider your biggest addition to the High Republic story, overall story, has been?
Well, I mentioned earlier on that the five of us had to come up with pitches that were put forward, and it was my pitch that was taken forward. So that's not to say the High Republic, as it currently stands, is the story I pitched, but it was the structure and the format and the nameless were in there. They were very different, but the concept of a four-seater was in there. So I think that's probably the biggest contribution I made. We then pulled it apart and put elements of the other pictures in and rearranged things and reconsidered stuff. But again, that whole idea came from a question I asked in the first session, which is, what scares the Jedi? Which again, there are groups of fans who go, well, nothing scares the Jedi. It's not, but they still feel fear. You know, they're not emotionless. They're not Vulcans, and even Vulcans have emotions. They just manage them. And again, and that's where I was coming from. Was the fact that Jedi are still people, and they're trying to control it. Like the most religious person in the world has urges they have to control through their religion, and that's how I was viewing the Jedi. So probably that question, what scares the Jedi? That was probably the thing that sparked a lot of this. So that would probably be my favorite part of it. Yeah,
definitely. And I think without going into spoilers for people who haven't read the High Republic, I think an element that you've brought in, especially towards the end of Rising Storm, for example, is something that I think is an incredible part to this overall story, and I think it's a really good addition to Star Wars as a idea concept anyway. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, I would also say it was the original five, and then the writers that we brought on afterwards. It was our united view of how we view the Jedi, and actually we all view the Jedi differently, but it was the idea that we wanted to actually see behind the robes and behind the lightsabers and ask, why are these people Jedi? How can they continue being Jedi? Will they question it and not just have what we have in the prequels, a group of an order of people who are all just like on a road that they have to travel at that point. We were sort of trying to work out how they got there, and so that was what we were interested in.
So I know you sort of touched on it lately, saying about possible ending, but do you have any more High Republic stories in the pipeline?
Yes.
I'm not going to ask any more on that.
We don't want to get in trouble.
But that's good to know that obviously that you're still working on.
Yeah, I'm still working. It's always been I'm still working. I don't know when this is going out, but if people at San Diego Comic Con, where I am next week, they might hear about what some of those stories are.
Well, we're very jealous. We should be good.
I'm sure it'll be all over the internet. The thing about going to San Diego Comic Con is you don't see anything. And then what usually happens on the day after the con, before we fly home, we sit and watch YouTube. And we watch everything we didn't see because we were there. And so we experience it in exactly the same way. I will be sitting watching the Marvel Hall H presentation in my hotel room, on my computer, just like anyone else. I will be catching up all the trailers that were released that I didn't have a chance to see because I'm at the con. So I love San Diego Comic Con. It's an experience every time, but you actually don't experience a lot of San Diego Comic Con there. So we experience it exactly the same way. If that's any comfort.
Well, hopefully one day we'll see.
Yeah.
So this is something that I find really interesting. I'm interested to see your point on it. So we've obviously mentioned about characters you've created, like Ty Yorick, for example. But with reoccurring characters that have appeared in your stories, such as like Marchion Rowe, Bell Zettifar, or even like Chancellor Lena So, how do you find personally writing for these characters that have already been created and trying to match their personality and behaviours to your own story?
Well, in a strange kind of way, it's quite comforting because actually when you're writing Star Wars, that's pretty much what you're always doing. You're dealing with other people's characters, and you're trying to see where they've come from and where you can take them. And so for a lot of those characters, it's, I wouldn't say it's easier, but in a way you can some of the work has already been done, and it's been passed to you, and it's your responsibility to be true to that, but also move it on. So that's what I find exciting about it. And as I say, it's actually nearer to the wider writing Star Wars experience, because again, I've been very fortunate. I've written for every iteration of the era so far, and I've written from my favourite characters to obscure characters. But again, you come to it with the weight of what that is as well. So there is a responsibility as well, and you have a way as a fan of going, I need to make sure this is right. And I suppose you feel that same responsibility in a different way when you're doing other people's characters created by people and you know very well. So I feel a big responsibility. I haven't written very much, but when I did, I felt a massive responsibility to Justina, because she was Justina's baby. And so, I wanted to make sure that I honoured that and moved that forward, while also still being my take on it. And then you have we talked about Lorna, but again, Lorna was created by Charles, and then I took her in a different direction, and in some ways she's weirdly become my character. It's because it's my iteration of Lorna, which is very different to Charles's. But yeah, that's been the fun part of this project in particular, is being lent characters. It's weird when you see other people writing yours as well. That's odd. With Kiva, it hasn't happened a lot, but whenever it does, I'm like, what's she doing? And it's exciting because you see something new in her that then you go, oh right, and it wouldn't be something that I would have thought of. And so I've been able to take that on. And again, this is a very different kind of job to be a sole writer and writing your own material. You are writing in a shared universe, you're writing in a group, you're reacting from what other people are doing, and other people can add things. I think one of the things I added was Marky and Roe seeing ghosts, which has become part of the wider lore now, and it's been really interesting how people have adapted that. And it might not have been exactly what I thought was happening right at the beginning, but it's now evolved into something for his species and for his people that's really exciting. And so, and I've not got a chance yet to play. I did a bit in Path of Vengeance, and again, it's a little bit like a Game of Consequences. You're always adding something new. So, when I wrote Path of Vengeance, and apologies because you haven't got there yet, it's the grandmother of Marky and Roe. And she experiences ghosts as well in the same way that Markian does, but in a slightly different way. And when I pitched it, they weren't in there. And when I wrote it, they appeared, and then that became part of what we now see in the Phase 3 novels. And so that's, again, it's that thing of like you're adding, and you want to add, you don't want to subtract. You don't want to change someone else's characters and someone else's path in a way that completely veers off in a different direction. And then you have experiences where, again, I don't want to spoil this for people who are up there, a major part of the Jedi family dies at the end of Phase 1.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I think we've all been quite open about it. That wasn't planned from the beginning. That happened during the development, and it changed a lot of things afterwards. But again, that was the fun part, because we were going, okay, we had a conversation. If that person dies, what does that mean to this character later on? And that's just, again, it's like life. People don't always make it. And so life changes along the way, and it becomes more interesting in some ways than if that person was still there. So again, it's been such an interesting process, because we're pretty much where I thought we were going to be, but it's so much bigger. And I don't just mean in the scale of the books, but the depth of the storytelling.
Yeah.
It's so much more than when we sat in that original session after I'd made the pitch, and we pulled it to bits, and we started to draw the timeline. And here's Phase 1, and here's Phase 2, and here's Phase 3, and this is where that happens, and that's where this happens. Again, we knew where we were going. We didn't always know how we were going to get there.
Yeah.
And so that's been the discovery along the way. It's been fun.
I mean, like what I noticed, which I think was really interesting, and the reason why I was so I was so interested in that question was when you read. We'll take like Lorna and Marshall as an example. When you read Light of the Jedi, and you also read Rise and Storm, you can see, for me, there's a really interesting character growth development with Lorna, which is quite interesting. And even with Marshall, there's that growth. But I could still, I could read both stories together. You know, and you could, if you didn't know that they were written by other people, you know, you could almost see that their personalities and the way they would go about things is like a continuous line.
Yeah.
So that's why I was really interested to get your thoughts on how writing for someone that you know, someone else created and obviously had ideas for is like, if it's difficult or hard, but yeah.
No, it all has its challenges. The way I think about it with Lorna, in Light of the Jedi, you're seeing Lorna from Markion's point of view. In Rise and Storm, you're seeing Lorna from Lorna D's point of view. And then I basically run with that version. And I don't think we've seen anything from again, it's been a long time now since I read Light of the Jedi, but you know, again, she's far colder in that, because again, I think she's seen as a pawn by Markion. She's just one of the Tempest runners. She doesn't feature in his plans, and then we start to see that she has, and you know, and that was the joy of doing Tempest Runner, is actually going, well, where did she come from? Again, and it was little moments here and there. So going to Charles saying, why is her ship called the Lorna D? And he was like, I honestly don't know, but it was really cool when I wrote it. And then thinking about this and talking to the rest of the team, and then Justina saying, oh, she went to military school. Did she? Okay, you know, and again, trying to work out that kind of thing, and we were having conversations. We were like, we get the thing, and actually, she could have been royalty, but that's gone off the rail. And again, it was like all those different. You know, how did that person end up being that Twi'lek with pointed teeth and piercings? And I don't think again when we started, no one even remotely believed that she was a princess, which is what actually she starts off in life as. And so. Yeah, I think she is one of the examples of how these characters have been a joint effort.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been very fortunate to write the majority of her through line. But it's a through line that's become more exciting for me as people have written her and gone, oh, we've got this bit of news now, or we've got this, or why didn't you do that? And that's been the experience of Harry Potter.
Nice. For me, you know, like I mentioned, Marshall, is a character that I've become quite a bit of a fan of. I think his way of sort of tacticians, strategy, his whole personality is something very new, fresh in Star Wars, and it's just something that I relish. And you know, I love all the stories, you know, that involve him especially. So you know, that's something that I very much appreciate.
I think we all write Markion slightly different as well. I think Charles's row is far more calculating than my row, who's more peace still. And I think Charles is actually, he's a very, you know, I say this in love, he's a very calculating man. Everything is planned. He's a lawyer, you know. I think more with my head.
So he is a lawyer.
So he thinks with his head, I think more with my heart. And I think we both write Markion row in a different way because of that. They're still the same character. But his Markion row is very much logical and everything's planned, whereas I try and write him a bit more when he has to react to things and his plan doesn't go quite right. And I think again, all of us write row, and that's row was completely Charles's creation in the beginning, and I think that's the genius of that character, is that he has, like any villain, he's a multifaceted character. And we can all write him in a slightly different way, and it's still row. It's still the eye of the storm.
Yeah. And you know, again, I like the idea that you know he is this great villain to the Jedi, but he's not a Sith. He's not, you know, he's not what the typical enemy of a Jedi should be, especially when you first meet him. You know, so again, another reason why I just think he's an incredible character, and especially in Rise and Storm. a very interesting character.
Which he doesn't, he's not actually in it a lot as well. It's like, but he makes his presence felt in every story he's in.
Yes, yes. Especially towards the end, I would say that. So we're sort of coming towards the end now.
Mhm.
So to sort of end, so we say the High Republic, questions and that for you. How, I want you to sum up the High Republic in 5 words.
A more civilized age under fire.
I like that. I think that works really well. Yeah, so obviously, normally when we get guests on, we're always the one asking the questions. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask us for a bit of a change, we're happy to.
Okay, put me on the spot. Okay, as a storyteller in Star Wars, I'm always interested in what people think about things and stories they've read. What thing, if you had the power, absolute power, what would you change about the Star Wars story so far?
Are we talking more like characters, or are we just talking?
However you want to take the question.
That's a tricky one.
This is very tricky.
I know it's a little bit minuscule, but I almost would like to see, a little bit of spoilers in case you haven't seen it, but at the end of the Clone Wars, we get the very emotional moment where Jesse sort of turns on Rex, and as much as it is an emotional scene and powerful, and as much as it hurts me every time I see it that he turns on him, I think I'm gonna say I would like to almost have seen a redemption for Jesse, since he was a character that we grew up watching with the Clone Wars, become big fans of, and then sort of because of this inhibitor chip, completely is unmoving in his resolve to execute this order. So I would probably change that outcome so that Jesse sides with Rex.
Right.
I have a very similar one.
Oh.
Obviously, we all know the arc with Fives discovering the whole inhibitor chip thing, and then he ends up getting killed. Spoiler alert, guys. I wish he didn't die because he was one of my favourite clones. But obviously, if he had lived, then the story wouldn't be the same, because obviously people would have found out about the chips a lot sooner than what they did. So it's a difficult one.
It is a difficult one, but it's a very good question though.
And it's fun. What ifs are wonderful, because that's what again makes it fun.
Exactly.
And it gets you thinking about how stories work and why we love these things.
Exactly.
And it always comes back to character. Whenever I've asked people that question, it's never a big world-building thing. It's always down to a character's choice.
Exactly. I think as well, like you mentioned, what if? What if has been such a successful concept for Marvel and the whole MCU thing, And I think seeing that as a Star Wars idea would be something really interesting. I think we've had an episode where in the past where we've discussed possible what if scenarios, like what if Anakin didn't fall to the dark side, and stuff like that.
What if Darth Vader lived on?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's an amazing Dark Horse series that did exactly this, and one of the issues is what if Vader lived, and he has an amazing white armor, which is basically Darth Vader in white, and it works so well.
Which they are actually making in Lego minifigs.
Exactly.
Which is going to be very cool.
Exactly. So we're getting our dream. We're getting on it. Yeah, I don't think I'd ever want a multiverse in Star Wars, but it's always. I mean, they're doing it with aliens now, and Marvel. There's a What If Aliens series, which I've not picked up the latest issue, but it's what if they got an alien back to Earth as they originally planned at the end of Aliens. I mean, I think we all know how that would end. But I think these things again, it does make you think why you like these stories, and it makes you appreciate the choices that were made.
Yeah. Especially, you ask that question, straight away on the spot, because it's like there's so much to this universe and world. I could have picked so many little things, but talking of the actual story itself, I like the whole, just sort of going on to Rise and Storm quickly before we finish. I like the whole sort of Republic fair idea, and again, another reason why I love the High Republic is we see the Jedi in an era where they're technically at their peak, as some would say, with like how they're represented and how they're meant to be, how a Jedi is meant to be. I was chatting to someone recently, and I made it they asked me, oh, if you could be someone in like Star Wars in a time period, who would you be? And my answer was, I would be a Jedi, but I wouldn't be a Jedi in the prequel era. I would want to be.
Really bad.
Yeah.
Yes, as much as as a fan, I love the Clone Wars. As a characters that I'm reading, not just in your story, but in all the others, I would want to be a Jedi in this High Republic era. I've got it on my top, but I'm quite a big fan of Stellan. I think Stellan is a really good representation of what the Jedi, should be, and especially seeing his connection with Venestra as well. So for me, and I think as well, like you put in the Rise and Storm, we see emotions and feelings, especially with Stellan and the people around him. So yeah, definitely one of my favourite characters.
I think if you want to live in any era, I think I want to live in the Young Jedi Adventures, because everyone just loves the Jedi and that, and even if they don't, they're still really cool. We're so excited. I think the Young Jedi Adventures is the proper golden age of the Jedi, and Starlight Beacon is still shining bright.
That's a really good point, because reading the novels and that, I actually watched Young Jedi Adventures because obviously I knew that the last episode in it, we see Starlight Beacon, and I think it was really nice because it's like, if you're quite a visual person, you can picture Starlight quite well, but when you actually see it, it's a place I would love to visit if I was in that Star Wars universe.
It's the one place I hope, I don't know if this would ever happen, but I'd love to tell more stories about Starlight, because we didn't know it for long, and I feel there's a lot more to tell.
Yeah, and I think the Starlight stories were quite fun little little add-ons to the bigger beacon itself, shall we say.
And they're still playing out, those characters are still there. And they may pop up again in other things.
Fingers crossed. So yeah, that's going to be about it for today's episode, guys. We hope you've enjoyed this very special episode. Cavan, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been really good, especially picking your brain about the High Republic. But yeah, so we will see you guys soon on a future episode. So from me, guys, may the force be with you.
And from me, for light and life.